Most people experience emotional pain as something the mind naturally wants to eliminate. Heartbreak, grief, shame, fear, rejection, anxiety, loneliness, and emotional wounds all feel unpleasant, so it seems obvious that the nervous system should immediately seek release from them. But psychologically, emotional pain often becomes deeply integrated into prediction, identity, memory, and behavioral stability beneath awareness. Once suffering remains present long enough, the nervous system begins adapting around it. Emotional pain stops feeling like a temporary experience and starts becoming part of the structure the mind uses to organize reality itself. Familiar suffering creates predictable emotional territory. The person learns how to think inside it, behave inside it, anticipate inside it, and identify inside it. Over time, the pain becomes psychologically embedded into routines of thought, emotional expectation, relationships, memory interpretation, and self-concept. The result is deeply confusing because consciously people often want relief, while unconsciously the nervous system continues preserving the familiar emotional structure beneath awareness. The pain feels terrible, yet it also feels known. And psychologically, the known often feels safer than the uncertainty that might exist without it. The nervous system prioritizes familiarity over happiness, far more than most people realize. Predictable emotional environments reduce uncertainty because the brain already understands how to navigate them. Even painful emotional states can therefore become psychologically stabilizing once repeated enough. A person raised around criticism may unconsciously feel more emotionally oriented inside relationships containing judgment than inside relationships containing calm support. Someone familiar with emotional abandonment may repeatedly recreate unstable attachment dynamics because instability itself became emotionally recognizable. The conscious mind experiences the resulting suffering as unwanted, yet deeper predictive systems continue organizing behavior toward what feels emotionally familiar underneath. This creates the painful contradiction where people repeatedly move toward experiences they consciously know will hurt them because the nervous system associates familiarity with safety more strongly than it associates pleasure with safety. Emotional pain also survives because identity gradually organizes itself around suffering. Repeated wounds become incorporated into self-concept through memory, emotional reinforcement, and narrative repetition. Someone repeatedly hurt may begin identifying as damaged, abandoned, anxious, unwanted, or emotionally broken. These identity structures then stabilize prediction because the mind starts interpreting future experiences through the emotional logic of the wound automatically. The suffering becomes familiar enough that releasing it threatens identity continuity itself. Without the pain, the nervous system no longer knows exactly who the person is emotionally. This is why healing can feel strangely destabilizing, even when consciously desired. Painful identity structures may hurt deeply, but they still provide orientation. The mind therefore often protects suffering not because it enjoys pain, but because the suffering became psychologically intertwined with selfhood beneath awareness. Memory reinforces emotional pain continuously because the brain repeatedly reactivates emotionally significant experiences in order to improve future prediction. Painful memories receive strong emotional encoding because the nervous system wants to avoid similar danger later. But repeated reactivation strengthens the emotional accessibility of the wound over time. The mind revisits conversations, betrayals, losses, humiliations, and emotional injuries repeatedly because unresolved pain continues feeling relevant to prediction systems underneath awareness. Over time, these memories stop functioning only as recollections of the past. They begin shaping present identity, emotional expectation, and behavioral readiness continuously. The person then experiences the pain as permanently alive because the nervous system keeps reconstructing it in the present moment again and again. Relationships often intensify this process because attachment systems become deeply linked to emotional familiarity. People frequently form bonds not only through comfort and affection, but through recognizable emotional patterns learned earlier in life. Someone accustomed to inconsistency may unconsciously experience stable love as emotionally unfamiliar or even unsettling. Another person may repeatedly pursue emotionally unavailable partners because longing itself became intertwined with attachment emotionally. The nervous system then recreates painful relational dynamics automatically because familiar suffering still preserves predictive orientation. This is why toxic relationships can feel so difficult to leave. The pain itself became emotionally integrated into attachment systems underneath awareness. Letting go, therefore, threatens not only the relationship, but the emotional predictability the nervous system built around it. Grief reveals this mechanism clearly because emotional pain can become intertwined with connection itself. After significant loss, the nervous system often preserves suffering partly because the pain still feels psychologically linked to the person, relationship, or emotional reality that disappeared. Letting go may unconsciously feel like erasing connection entirely. The mind, therefore, continues revisiting memories, replaying emotional moments, and sustaining grief because the suffering itself became one of the last remaining forms of emotional continuity. This does not mean grief is artificial or chosen deliberately. The attachment is real, but psychologically, the nervous system may preserve pain partly because pain still maintains relational orientation toward what was lost. The individual then experiences profound internal conflict, consciously wanting relief while unconsciously fearing that releasing the suffering may also weaken the emotional bond preserved through it. Trauma operates similarly because the nervous system keeps emotionally painful experiences active when it does not fully categorize them as resolved or safe. Highly threatening experiences become encoded intensely because survival systems prioritize preserving predictive information associated with danger. Later, reminders resembling aspects of the original threat may reactivate emotional responses automatically before conscious awareness fully understands why. The person then experiences the pain as ongoing because the nervous system continues treating parts of the experience as emotionally unfinished. Repetition, hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, emotional flashbacks, and recurring fear patterns emerge because the brain is still attempting to maintain preparedness against future danger underneath awareness. The suffering survives partly because the nervous system believes maintaining emotional activation improves protection predictively. Self-sabotage often emerges from the same structure because familiar pain can feel emotionally safer than unfamiliar possibility. A person may unconsciously disrupt healthy relationships, avoid meaningful opportunities, withdraw from emotional closeness, or recreate instability precisely when life begins moving beyond familiar suffering patterns. The conscious mind experiences confusion and frustration afterward because the behavior appears irrational, but deeper nervous system structures may interpret positive change as unpredictability threatening emotional orientation. Familiar suffering already has known emotional rules. Healing introduces uncertainty. The person then unconsciously returns toward recognizable pain because predictability stabilizes the nervous system more effectively than unfamiliar emotional openness does beneath awareness. Negative thought loops reinforce suffering because repeated emotional focus strengthens the accessibility of painful psychological patterns continuously. Thoughts such as "I'm unlovable," "people always leave," "nothing changes," or "I'll get hurt again" eventually become emotionally familiar cognitive environments. The nervous system rehearses these narratives repeatedly because they create stable predictive structure around pain. Over time, the thoughts stop feeling like interpretations and begin feeling like direct reflections of reality itself. The person then experiences emotional suffering as inevitable and self-confirming because the mind continuously filters experience through pain-oriented predictive frameworks beneath awareness. Repetition stabilizes the suffering psychologically until it becomes difficult to separate identity from the emotional narrative reinforcing it. The body also adapts physiologically to repeated emotional states. Chronic anxiety, grief, fear, shame, hypervigilance, or emotional tension alter nervous system regulation gradually over time. Once the body becomes accustomed to certain levels of emotional activation, calmer states may initially feel emotionally unfamiliar or even unsafe. The absence of familiar tension creates uncertainty because the nervous system no longer recognizes the emotional environment predictively. This is why some people feel restless when life becomes peaceful after long periods of emotional chaos. Calmness itself feels psychologically destabilizing because the body adapted to functioning inside heightened emotional states continuously. The suffering, therefore, survives not only cognitively, but physiologically beneath awareness as well. Pain also survives because suffering often creates meaning. Emotional wounds become integrated into personal narratives explaining identity, relationships, purpose, and emotional history. People organize entire understandings of themselves around experiences of rejection, betrayal, abandonment, struggle, sacrifice, or emotional survival. Over time, the pain becomes part of the story, giving coherence to life itself. Letting go can therefore feel existentially threatening because the nervous system fears losing the meaning structure built around the suffering. The person may unconsciously wonder, "Who am I without this pain?" The suffering then remains emotionally active, partly because it stabilizes narrative continuity and identity orientation beneath awareness. The mind often mistakes emotional familiarity for emotional truth. Painful patterns repeated long enough begin feeling fundamentally real because repetition stabilizes them psychologically. Someone accustomed to rejection may interpret neutral social situations through abandonment expectation automatically. Someone familiar with shame may perceive criticism more intensely than acceptance. The nervous system prioritizes information matching familiar emotional structures because prediction becomes easier inside recognizable patterns. The resulting suffering then feels objectively confirmed by reality itself, even when the mind is partly organizing perception around pre-existing emotional expectations beneath awareness. Pain survives because the nervous system continuously rebuilds the emotional world in ways that reinforce familiar predictive structures. This is why letting go often feels frightening rather than purely relieving. Releasing familiar suffering means releasing predictable emotional territory the nervous system spent years organizing itself around. Even when the pain hurts deeply, it still provides orientation, identity continuity, relational familiarity, and emotional predictability. Without it, the person enters uncertainty. New emotional states become possible, but unfamiliarity increases as well. The nervous system then experiences healing not only as relief, but as destabilization. The fear of the unknown competes against the desire to escape pain. Familiar suffering may therefore continue reproducing itself, because the nervous system prioritizes continuity more strongly than conscious awareness initially realizes. The deeper problem is that the mind often tries to eliminate pain intellectually while unconsciously preserving the emotional structures sustaining it underneath. A person may consciously repeat affirmations, pursue distractions, or force positivity while deeper nervous systems continue expecting abandonment, shame, danger, rejection, or instability predictively. Surface-level thought changes rarely fully resolve suffering, because emotional familiarity exists deeper than conscious reasoning alone. The nervous system learned the pain physically, emotionally, relationally, and predictively across repeated experience. Healing, therefore, requires more than convincing the mind logically that the suffering should disappear. It requires gradually teaching the nervous system that unfamiliar emotional safety is survivable too. The deeper realization is not that people secretly want suffering, It is that the nervous system often preserves familiar emotional pain, because the pain became integrated into prediction, identity, memory, attachment, physiology, and meaning beneath awareness. Suffering survives because the mind learned how to organize itself around it. The emotional wound becomes psychologically woven into the structure of the self until releasing it threatens continuity itself. Once this becomes visible, emotional repetition starts making sense differently. The question stops being, "Why can't I let go?" and becomes, "How deeply did my nervous system learn to depend on this pain for familiarity, prediction, and identity?" And within that realization, healing changes fundamentally. Recovery stops meaning simply forcing pain to disappear. Instead, it becomes the gradual process of teaching the mind and body that stability, connection, safety, and identity can exist even without the familiar suffering they once depended on continuously beneath awareness.